Hello and welcome to this live stream from the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling. My name is Tana Russell. I am Deputy Director at the Council, and this is our live stream during Problem Gambling Awareness Month and in preparation for Gambling Disorder Screening Day, which at the time we are streaming this event is coming up this coming Tuesday, March 12th. This is being live streamed to both Facebook and YouTube. This is not for continuing education credits, whether live or on demand after. This is our way of getting free, reliable information out to the public from some leading experts in this field. You can participate if you would like to leave comments or ask questions. Just keep in mind, Facebook and YouTube are not private platforms. So only share what is yours to share and what you are comfortable with the world being able to see. But we welcome your comments and questions, and you may see them pulled on screen during the episode. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome our guests for this episode. We have Dr. Deborah Haskins, who is tuning in all the way over from Maryland, and she has various degrees and licenses in the counseling field, including a board-approved clinical consultant, specialties in working with faith communities. She is the president emeritus of the Maryland Council on Problem Gambling and specializes in gambling disorder, cultural competencies, social justice, and working with faith communities. We also have Dr. Washington-Harvey, also well-educated individual, lots of degrees and licenses, over 30 years counseling experience in this field. She's also a mental health forensic evaluator and is a court expert witness on various cases, including family custody cases, among other things. So thank you both for joining us. And is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience, if you don't mind maybe talking about why this topic is important to you?
Yeah, I guess, well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Tana. Thank you, Evergreen Council. And it's great to see you, Dr. Washington-Harvey. This is an important topic for me, and I've been in this field since the early 90s when I first started working with people with gambling problems. And it came out of my experience as a person of African descent, seeing the lots of different reasons why many people in my own community were gambling. And oftentimes it was because it was a side job for them, because the world didn't offer them equity and jobs and access to opportunities in equal ways. Many people, Black men, were gambling, as well as Black women, to support their families. And I wondered, why there were these high rates of people falling into addiction. And I had to understand the many reasons why. And that brings me up to present day, really providing more community wellness support, because a lot of people, particularly in cultural communities, don't access mental health treatment. And so really working outside the box to reach people where they are, to give them the information to help them be healthier.
Well, for me, it's been a personal journey because growing up, I had different family that did gamble. And it was part of the norm of just who we were as a family. My grandmother was a bookie, and that was very interesting to me. I mean, we didn't promote gambling within our household, but we knew people that did. And I began to notice the devastating effects of gambling in my practice. And even today, when I take cases, gambling is often, not all the time, but often part of it, or can impact the quality of life, relationships. And with the gaming now that's coming in, that puts a whole new face on it, because gaming in little ones seems like fun. But I'm curious to see, when does it switch and why? What is happening for people? So that's my reasons for pursuing this.
Thank you. And can you talk to us a little bit about what kinds of gambling realities some of these communities, particularly those that you have close experience with, live with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I'll jump in. And actually, I appreciate Dr. Washington-Harvey, you sharing your experience and what you noticed, because actually, my grandfather was a numbers runner. He used to own his own store, and in his store, he was running numbers. And I recall my mom even saying on his deathbed, he's dying, and he asked my mother, "What's today's number?" You
Hmm.
know, and she couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe it. Here he is about to transition, and so, there are a lot of different reasons, as I shared, what got me into this field. But people will gamble because a lot of times it starts out as just recreation. They want to enjoy. They want to enjoy the fun of the gambling. And it seems like a reasonable solution, just like any type of entertainment, going to bowl or going to, a concert. They may just want to go to the casino like many older adults do. It's free for some of them because they're giving them free food, and they can go there and be in the environment. They go with their friends. They don't feel isolated. And so for others, they may be gambling because it starts to take on a different meaning for them if they are depressed, if they're feeling, if they've had experiences of trauma, and the trauma impacts your brain and makes people feel, sometimes depending on the type of trauma, whether it was some form of abuse, or for example, a lot of our vets were in war, and so they have these memories, these intrusive memories that are very uncomfortable and painful. And so getting away through the game of gambling seems like an easy solution. One, because it's social, it's common in society, and it's socially accepted. So nobody's gonna look down on you if you're gambling versus if you were to have drink too much or using drugs or opiates. Some people are gambling after the big win because once that big win happens, they feel so much excitement because it feels good to win. Children love winning, adults love winning. And so when you win, you're like, oh, wow, great, this feels wonderful. I want more of that. And so then their brain gets conditioned to want to go back for the same experience. And so they may get pulled in. But I also see a lot of people in cultural communities like my own, being of African descent, as I mentioned, but even when we look at other cultural communities, whether it's whether it's someone who's native and indigenous, whether it's someone who in an Asian descent community, and there could be intersections of other cultures, but many times, gambling may be part of the culture. As what we were describing from our own lived experiences in our communities, but as part of the culture is what people do. You play cards on Friday night, baccarat, spades. In many Asian descent families, they have a mahjong game, or other games that they play. And so this is how the family gathers and they enjoy that time together. But then we also see that people gamble because they see it as a real solution to some real problems. If I don't have enough food to eat, I might feel like that is the way to get access to money, and people will start, trying to chase a dream. Like one of my persons who said, I want to leave this deadbeat job where I don't feel like my brain is being used. I'm bored to death. I'm not able to afford the lifestyle that I feel like I want to provide my family. But if I win the lottery, that's going to get me out of this situation. So for a lot of people, gambling is viewed as a solution. The dream of the win feels like a solution to some real problems. So one of my persons that I supported, he actually, was eating cereal for his only meal because now he was working 3 jobs to really support his gambling addiction. It didn't start out that way, but it ended up that way because he was losing money, and it pulled him in. But the way he started was he felt like he wasn't achieving when he compared himself to his peers. And because of that, gambling seemed like a reasonable solution to being able to catch up with his peers that he felt was ahead of him. So we see a lot of different reasons. And as Dr. Washington-Harvey said, like gaming, even, we see a lot of women who are swiping right, through the pandemic. People, men and women and children are swiping. And they're doing a lot of purchasing online. They're gaming online. They're playing these games because they didn't have anything else to do during the pandemic, or because they're lonely or they're bored. And so we're seeing a lot of people who are doing that. And now with sports betting, that's becoming another way for people to gamble.
So would you say maybe it seems like gambling by its nature is objective, non-discriminatory, like everybody's got the same chance of winning kind of, whereas in other areas of their life, including employment or earning or whatnot, they may be faced with inequities that are unjust and subjective?
Well, I'd like to jump in there. I do feel that gambling is not based on culture in the purest form. I think it is what you have grown up with, what you've seen, your reactions to trauma, childhood trauma. A lot of people use gambling, drinking, other addictions to escape the pain of trauma in their lives that's either sudden or that has a history. Gambling provides escape for individuals. And within the African American community, and what I've come to know, not everyone is necessarily wanting to escape realities, but it is driven on making enough money to provide for the family in the way the dominant culture provides for their family. So what you're talking about in terms of achieving is based on the barriers that are faced by our different cultures within the society, the way it is. So you have to be able to look at a way to elevate your standing, or at least to get the things that you want that you couldn't otherwise afford. But chasing the win is devastating for people, because you can't win in the long term. If you win, you have to look at your losses. And it's been my experience in the reports I've written and testified to in the courts, is that people come in with a definite way they want to gamble. They want to do this. It is for a purpose, to meet financial obligations. This has nothing to do with culture in that respect. We have people that make bad decisions, and they are chasing the win in order to rectify them. I had one case where the individual actually was gambling during COVID and committing fraud during COVID to maintain her lifestyle and make sure that her children got what they needed and normally did. So when you look at financially where people are, that could be different. It can be And we can have cases where individuals who were gambling, or I call it gambling, but I'm sure it isn't, investing in the stock market, and they have lost money and tell their spouses. That can impact a relationship. And one last thing for me, gambling is not well received in the general public. If you're in trouble because you're gambling, the people don't have the understanding and the tolerance for that, because individuals feel, oh, well, all you have to do is quit. It's your responsibility. All you have to do is quit. And then we have family members who maybe have had to assume more responsibility for the finances once gambling is part of the picture, and it has just about destroyed the family quality of life. They resent that. They resent having to do that.
Yeah.
Feel that this should be the individual's responsibility, or at the very minimum be shared. So those are my insights on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned some of the symptoms we look for as gambling counselors, the chasing and the continuing to do it despite the consequences to areas of life and family. And we have a question from one of the viewers who asks, is gambling potentially addictive to everyone or anyone? Are there some people who are more at risk? Is everybody at risk to a certain degree?
Well, one of the things I would say here, and that's a really good question. I want to thank the listener, because we know that some people will have a predisposition, we call it, like they may be more vulnerable to becoming addicted, because it could be that in their family health reality that there's a history genetically in the family of addictions, so that could set a person up to be more vulnerable to develop an addiction to gambling. And we actually have research to support that the children of people with a gambling disorder, if there's not support to address the gambling issues, oftentimes the children then become socialized to the gambling. They learn that that's the way that you resolve real problems in your life. If you are feeling stressed out because they saw their father or mother or grandparent or whoever it was in the family system, and that's how they learn to cope themselves. So we do have a lot of documented evidence for that. But then we also have people who were doing quite fine, that they never had a history of any kind of addiction. They never had any problems in the past. For example, we see a lot of women who, when they reach what we call midlife, they never had any problems, but then maybe there's some transition issue, like a death in their family, or they become divorced, or they had separation, or an intimate partner, sort of something happened in the relationship, or the children, as one of the persons who I supported, the children grew up, and the mother felt like, well, I'm not needed as much. I don't even know who I am now that my children don't need me. And then this person went to the casino and had a big win, $1,200, and that big win set up this cycle of her wanting to have that experience again. So we do see that there are a lot of people in the world that never had problems before, but then they can go to the casino, or they can purchase a lottery ticket, or they can place a bet on a sport, or they can participate in some gaming on their device. And once they have that win, that can set up a whole cycle of wanting to have that again. But then you have another group of people who, if they had some emotional situation, like they got unemployed, or they got laid off, or they lost their job, or they got moved to another sort of community. As one of my persons who I supported, he was a young guy, young white guy. He was in his 20s. He was now working in a rural area, and he was bartending at night after his management job during the day. But because he was separated from his family, he started gambling while he was bartending on the machines, and that started this whole cycle. So I think there's not one answer. We see a lot of different profiles of people who gamble. But I do think this question is a good one. And what I would say to the listener is this, is that if in your family history you see that, then you definitely want to be more careful. Additionally, if you see in your personality that you are one in your personality, which is not a negative thing, to be the kind of person that likes a lot of action, that likes to take risks. So we see, for example, a lot of males who are attracted to sports betting because maybe they enjoy sports, but they like the competition of the game, and they like to be in situations where they can use their brain, their mind to problem solve and to sort of try to figure high risk situations out. And those are the folks that we are also seeing in this new situations with sports betting, of those people getting kind of caught up in the cycle of high risk gambling, and what we call, they may then develop a gambling addiction.
Thank you.
I would like to add one
Yeah.
more thing to that, or emphasize this, is the notion of role modeling.
Mm.
And I think role modeling cannot be less understood by the public, and even sometimes in our own practices. I know for a fact that children look at role models, and they need to have healthy role models. So if they are being exposed early on to a gambling situation that creates trauma within the family unit or beyond, they're struggling for money. There is discord between the family members. There's a struggle to make ends meet. That creates a stress within the child, but they also are role modeled that this is the way life is, so that it sets them up for a solution that is not a healthy one, and that is to gamble. So we need to be able to think about restraint and modeling in front of children. Now, one thing I know, that culturally, playing cards, going to the casinos, some people enjoy that. The risk is they don't understand the risk of getting caught up in the moment. I've known people that I've helped to say, oh my gosh, I have won a wonderful amount of money. And then I'm asking, well, why do you think you're here today? How much have you lost? And they stumble on giving you that kind of information, sharing that insight, because it is denial. And for them, denial is, if I admit this, I'm going to be a bad person. And I'm not, they don't understand that gambling and going for treatment is going to help you overcome an addiction and hopefully live a better life for yourself. That's what I would like people to know about problem gambling. You have to understand it from a very holistic, family-based, situational-based issue. So, as you mentioned, Doctor, the many people can gamble, I guess, that can gamble and not ever develop an addiction. But there are those that do. And you
Yeah,
do have to pay attention
absolutely.
to what is happening,
Hmm.
your own exposure, your own experience, and your own reasons for
Yes.
gambling.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and so thank you, Dr. Washington-Harvey, because what we want people to understand is that gambling in itself is not a bad thing. You know, it's a form of play. It's a form of enjoyment. It's the intention to have fun. But when you start having problems with gambling, it's because you're going beyond the fun stage. You're now spending more time, you're spending more resources, whether it's money, whether it's, children are using their gaming equipment, their clothes, they're getting access to their parents and caregivers resources, like, taking, as they say, borrowing the credit card. I remember I got a call for help from one social worker whose father had taken the son when he turned 18 to the casino, and it was like a rites of passage. I mean, there was nothing inherently wrong about that. And they had a good time. But then this young man, when he went to college, his first semester, he and his girlfriend broke up. And because he was feeling so devastated about the breakup, he said, "I'm going to go to the casino because I want to just forget about um, feeling, sad and depressed. And I need a break from thinking about this and feeling this." And then he was able to escape, as Dr. Washington Harvey was explaining. He was escape. It kind of disassociates a person. What we mean by that, when we disassociate, we're able to forget about where we are in our life. It's almost like if you play a virtual game, you're able to escape through the game. A lot of the children like virtual games, or our young people like virtual games. We have people who are even adults who are gamers. They enjoy it because you're able to kind of step out of reality and enter this fantasy world. And that's what gambling can offer people. It allows me to forget. So this young man was able to step out of his reality and not feel, so sad about this woman I love, my first love of my life, now saying she doesn't care about me anymore. And guess what? He accessed his parents' credit card, and that's when they found out that he was having problems with gambling. So what we want people to know is, if you're watching this Facebook Live event and YouTube, is to learn how to engage in the game without running into these risks, not having it disrupt your life or destroy what ends up, for many people, feeling like their lives are now destroyed. Because in many cases, some people, they're going to have so much financial chaos and confusion and emotional confusion as a result of the chaos of the gambling, problem gambling and addiction, that they don't feel like they even want to live anymore. And we don't want people to feel that. We don't want you to be in the world feeling like your life is over if you start having problems with gambling. We're going to talk about how you can get help, because help and resources are available. And so the message for the public is to learn, how can you play without causing harm to yourself and causing harm to the people around you. And that includes your family members, your partners, your spouses, your parents, your children, your best friends or your friends, because many people will, begin to access funds through their friends by making up stories or lies and saying, "Hey, I lost my job. Can you help me pay my rent?" And the friend doesn't know that they're really using the money to gamble with, and then they find out after the fact what's really going on. So we just want people to know how to set limits, but also, if you are meeting what we call the diagnosis of having a gambling addiction, when you get into you seek help professionally and say it is diagnosed that you do have an addiction, your life isn't over. And we want you to know that there's some menu options that you can choose in order to get well and to have, hope in your life.
Me and you two have covered a lot.
Oh.
We've talked about family impacts, financial impacts, family and environmental risk factors, mental and emotional health concerns that can put people at risk, and finding that balance to set limits, and even the impacts on youth and gaming. And we have a question from the audience. She asks on youth and gambling. In underserved communities, are children of the Black community at a greater disadvantage to developing a gaming addiction than children of other communities?
Well, I would like to respond to that. I think that is not necessarily the case. They're not at a greater disadvantage because of the nature of gambling and what we use as an escape. Now, gambling could be a coping mechanism for some. It could be, we talked about some of the issues that are presented. I think socioeconomic factors across ethnicities is a possible issue if the gambling has been used to supplement or get things for your family or yourself. It's just like a drug dealer. I have worked with drug people that use drugs and even that have sold them. And they're very pragmatic. They're not thinking about the lives they're destroying necessarily. For them, it's a business. And so we need to look at gambling not as a business or not as being disadvantaged based across ethnicity lines. We need to look at the purpose of gambling. The family history is very important to be able to understand the exposure and their use for gambling. And one other thing is we have to realize that we know that if people are drinkers, if you have a history of alcohol abuse or substance abuse within your family, that increases your chances of becoming that, because people are using these things for a reason. And we always have to know the reason for you first using, and then also their level of commitment to change. You are committed to change. You may have relapses, but you get back on that wagon and keep rolling, or the boat keep rowing. So I hope that answers the question of the. I thank you for that question, because it is really a very good one.
And can I add to that too, what Dr. Washington-Harvey is stating? Because right now we're still early into understanding youth gaming. I mean, we do have some information and research that helps us to understand it, but we know because our children are living in a technology world that it doesn't matter what race or ethnicity or even sort of class level in many cases, depends on whether the person has access to some digital devices. We do know that individuals who live in communities economically that they don't have, say, laptops, or they don't have iPhones or their own telephones or, iPads or things like that, that may limit the time that they're able to actually participate in gaming, for example. But they may also have friends who have those devices that they may spend time playing games with using their devices. But we do know that we do have research, and I don't want to get into research in this topic, because that's not the purpose of today's program. But I do want to say that we do have research that shows that youth that are living in communities that have disadvantages, that we do have evidence that shows that those individuals, those young people, tend to be at risk because of the disadvantages in their neighborhoods. And this is not just theoretical. This is research that was done looking at, like in one study looked at children in the third grade, and they followed these same African American children until these children were 21 years old. And they were able to see that these children who encountered problem gambling were children who lived in communities that had higher rates of unemployment. They had a lot of poverty in the community. They may have had a lot of liquor stores in their community, which sets you up for, higher rates of alcoholism. They had maybe a lot of drug trafficking in their communities because, as Dr. Washington-Harvey says, a lot of these people, we live in a capitalist society, and if you don't feel like you can get access to good paying jobs and you don't have transportation in your community to even get to good paying jobs, and you are of a certain race and ethnicity where you don't have equal opportunity to be hired and given an opportunity, then people are going to work it out the best way they know how. And historically, they may sell drugs, they may do other things to help them get access to funds. So I say all that to say that we do see that, but we also see that we see that young people who may have experienced homelessness, for example, that in the future we see that these are folks who become problem gamblers as adults. Why? Because if they were growing up in a time where they didn't have enough food or they didn't have housing security, and maybe that they experienced homelessness, that the family had to figure out, including themselves, how they were going to get their next meal. And sometimes many of these individuals are reporting they played the game of craps, or they started getting access to illegal gambling games in their community where they could maybe win something. Or in my state, we have a casino out in the western part of the state, which is a rural county. And guess what? They have a high level of poverty in that community, which is largely European descent. And I learned that the volunteer fire department does a lot of gambling. And I asked the question why during a townhouse, and it says because the state doesn't care about us. We have to figure out how we're going to take care of ourselves, because we can't depend on the state to look out for people out here near the mountains. And so people are going to figure out how they're going to take care of themselves and their family members in the best way. And if they're dropping $7,000 a night in the volunteer fire department, and that word is out on the street, guess what? That's where people are going to go and use that as a solution to some real problems that they have. So I know that's going beyond what the person is saying, but I wanted to say a little bit about, we are seeing that young people who are gaming more, but who may also gamble, if they're in these family situations where there's some vulnerability, whether it's financial and emotional, economic, job, employment, etc., it could set them up for risk.
Thank you. You know that. Oh, go ahead.
Well said. But I also want to make sure that people are clear that race has nothing to do with this. This is socioeconomic issues.
Absolutely.
And that's across the board.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that Dr. Haskins and I have run across people that their ethnicity is a factor on another level, but their socioeconomic status and their family histories very well mirror each other.
Absolutely.
So I think that's important.
Yes.
Because thinking of it in one way could promote stereotypes.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, we're not supporting that at all.
Right.
Because unfortunately, the world will see things as black and white.
Right.
The world sees, we tend to in the United States focus on white Americans, European descent versus African Americans, African descent. And we have done a lot of harm, as Dr. Washington-Harvey is trying to highlight. We're doing a lot of harm by only looking at race. But what we know is that there's the intersection, that different things intersect with one another,
Right.
and can make it more complex and make it more dynamic. And so when you start adding other things in, it's going to provide a clearer picture of why a person may be falling into, chaos and confusion of gambling. So, like, I do a lot of work with my brothers and sisters over in Africa and Nigeria, and for the last 2 years. And what I learned is, guess what? They have a lot of sports betting going on, 50% among women as well as men. And I asked them, why is there so much gambling going on, particularly when we see it's equalized with men and women? And it's because they're attracted to sports betting. Why? Because it's fast money. And why? Because they're living in poverty. And not just poverty, but hard poverty. Hard poverty, where some people, I heard them talk about, even having a meal is a privilege. It's like having a meal is actually a privilege. Like, if you get to eat a meal in some of these family situations, that's like a privilege. It's not a given that you're actually going to have a meal, because they just don't have it. They don't have it. They don't have the money to feed their families. They don't have food to feed everybody in the family. And so it is definitely a challenge when people are living in hard poverty, and they may see gambling as a real solution to some very real problems.
Yeah, thank you. This is a complex issue with a lot of variables. And, one other I thought of, I'll add in, particularly that's relevant up in our state here in Washington, but I know in other states, is geographic location and access to help services. We've got the I-5 corridor with still not enough gambling help services even there, but that's kind of where a lot of them are centered. And so for some, they live in communities where the gambling is right there, but the prevention, treatment, and recovery services are, 2-3 hours away. It's just not realistic to get to, which is another variable. One more question real quick, and then we'll get to kind of our last thought to close out. Someone asked about red flags for addiction. And so, as we know, gambling disorder, it can develop slowly over time, or it can develop in a very short period of time very quickly. But either way, in my experience, it seems to really sneak up on people, right? Whether it's short or long, it can really kind of sneak up on people. Based on what you all have seen, are there a few tips on red flags that would be kind of the signs of, yes, be concerned at this point, and go get the opinion of a professional?
Yeah. Go for it, Dr. Harvey, Washington-Harvey.
We're going back and forth here, but I want to start on that. I think observing changes in behavior, or sort of people going into their caves. You can have individuals that go into their caves where they become withdrawn. That's what I mean. They become irritable, perhaps for no real reason as far as you can see. Secrecy about finances, lying about finances. Bills aren't getting paid on time or properly. Lying about their situation, lying about paying bills, or lying about where they're going, the secrecy of it per se. And so to me, those are really big red flags. Also, their levels of substance abuse, alcoholism has increased, because it is often co-occurring with gambling. That's why when you go to casinos, they're very bright and welcoming, and they want everyone to have a good time. But if you notice, they're also applying people with drinks and complimentary things. So you may have a person that comes home from work and they want to start drinking, or they don't come home straight from work, and they don't come home for maybe 2 or 3 hours later, and sometimes all night. Now, you also need to worry and be aware of if women can be predators at the casinos, because sometimes, I'm not saying it happens often, but I've had cases where women have performed sexual acts in the parking lots of cars or whatever to get money to go back in and gamble. So, but that's very shaming to them. You may not find that out in the home, but that might come out in a treatment situation. So those are just some initial thoughts I have. I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Haskins.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Washington-Harvey described a lot of them really well. I would say additional red flags. I mean, I think we've already highlighted, if you're spending too much time than what you typically did, where it's now getting in the way of you working. You can't focus on your job because you're already thinking about when you're going to leave and planning when you're going to start playing the game or gamble again. If you are not spending time in your typical roles as a dad, as a mom, as a granny, you're missing important milestones. There was a birthday party, you didn't show up. You never did that before because you were so focused on your gambling. So you're missing milestones too. If you're noticing that the person, it has unaccounted periods of time where they just disappear. As one caller said, my boyfriend said he was going to McDonald's. He didn't come back for 10 hours. McDonald's is right down the street. He asked me if I want anything. I know he's at the casino. So if people have unaccounted blocks of time, and then when they come back and they're reporting and they're telling you and it just doesn't add up, it's not connecting, that's a red flag. If a person is becoming like aggressive in the relationship, where we have situations where the person may be, violating the loved one, whether it's a parent, a love relationship, they could be becoming abusive to their children, for example, or other people in their environment, siblings, etc. They become aggressive or irritable because they're angry that they can't gamble or they lost, and so they're taking out their upset on the people around them. That's a red flag. So I think with gaming in particular, parents need to understand this too. A lot of times we have situations with parents who the device actually becomes a free babysitter for parents and for caregivers.
Good point.
And so what I'm going to say about this is, for some parents and caregivers, they like that their child is in the home because you know where they are. They feel like they're safer than being in the community if they're worried about the safety of the community, or they don't have time to take their child or have the even money or resources to get their child to extracurricular activities, for example. And so for some, when their children are gaming, the parents are happy because they can, particularly like even in cases where the parents are working remotely, the child is not interrupting their ability to work. Or say that the parent or caregiver is working and they're tired when they come home, the child is, focusing on some game. The parents are oftentimes relieved, and they don't realize that even with gaming, there needs to be a limit based on the age of the child. There's actually age limits of how much time our children should be spending on gaming equipment or devices. And so in a lot of these families, one of the recommendations is, particularly with young children, that you take the device from your child at a certain time and they don't get the device back until the next day. So
Right.
you're setting some limits, or, you're telling them they have to shut down the laptop or the iPad or the gaming equipment. And in many cases, like if the child becomes irritable and aggressive, then the parents are going to, that's a signal that you need to get some help, because it could be that your child has a gaming addiction, or they are now in that, getting close to that high risk sort of cutoff boundary where they need some help and support to get them back to a balanced experience, like more normal
Right.
experience.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to add to what you're saying just briefly. When
Mhm.
you're looking at children where they are developmentally and what they're
Mm.
supposed to be doing developmentally, gaming has put a whole different
Mhm.
connotation on that, in my view. And the
Yeah.
reason I say that is because we're not used to children uh, growing up with a gaming device. We're
Mhm.
used to children growing up with outside activities.
Mhm.
When I was a child, going outside and playing for
Mhm.
a reasonable period of time. But what I have observed uh, is that gaming teaches children the expectation to win,
Mhm.
but doesn't do, and that interferes with a child's ability to learn that you don't win all the time.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you're putting stressors, and they
Mhm.
are, unbeknownst to them, putting stressors on themselves. I've got to win. I've got to win. I've got to win.
Mhm.
And when you're 5 and 6 years old, 7, 8,
Yeah. Yeah.
you don't know how to handle that. I mean,
Mhm.
you really don't. So, what I'm having to do when I've seen children with
Mhm.
gaming issues is teach them that it's okay to lose. And what
Yeah.
happens when you lose? It,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
know, don't go back.
Yeah.
Give yourself a break. You
Yeah.
jump
Yeah.
something else.
Thank you, Dr. Washington-Harvey. Thank you for sharing that, because, you know, with gaming games, the games, there are benefits of gaming. It's teaching children how to problem solve. It teaches children how to analyze situations depending on the game. So I
Right.
think this is where the parents have to have more thinking about the games that you let your children participate in, because if you're letting them participate in certain games that could put them at more risk, then that's not going to be helpful in terms of, developing their minds and their skills. The other thing too is that we have multiplayer games. And so for some children, and for many children, not some, when they get to have these multiplayer games, they're in a relationship with other children who have like interests. And those are all positive things. So it's not to suggest that gaming is a bad thing. There's positives about multiplayer games, for example, because they can interact with their cousins who are in another state. I have family members and grandchildren who play with their cousins who are all around, the state or the country. And that is a positive thing for them. The question is, what kind of games are they playing and how much time are they playing? And also, what Dr. Washington Harvey was saying, when they lose, what's happening. So I remember even in this last week, I have a 7-year-old grandson, and he likes that game, the game that's in restaurants where you put in $1 and it has like this hook thing, and it has like stuffed
Yeah.
animals or other toys, and you drop down. I mean, that game is already set up. Not everybody's going to be able to capture the game because it requires some manual dexterity, but even the way that the animals and toys and prizes are positioned, you can't really grasp the game. So when he lost, he's 7 years old, he was devastated.
Right.
So we just had a conversation with him, like Dr. Washington-Harvey, where his father was saying, listen, the reason why you lost that game is because the game is not designed for everybody to win. We live in a country where it's called capitalism, and the goal is for the business to make money off the game. And so that means that more of us are going to lose the game. So the message that his father was giving him is, you have to learn that this is gambling. And actually, we're not going to be letting you play these games a lot, because it's going to set you up for expecting that you're going to win, which the game is designed for more people to lose, so that the company who owns the game can gain more money. They're the winners. We're going to be more of the losers. So thank you for highlighting that. We need more parents to be having these conversations with their children.
Man, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. I'm so glad you guys are talking about this. I can't help it. I want to add a couple like orange flags, and then we'll close with our favorite help resources. But I like to recommend, think of gambling and gaming as entertainment you're paying for. And going out to see a movie shouldn't cause arguments at home. Your golf, your basketball, your crafting hobbies shouldn't be causing major arguments at home. So if gambling and gaming start causing major arguments, or think about how much time and money is appropriate for where you're at in your lifestyle and responsibilities to be spending on hobby and entertainment. And that is going to be different if someone's retired and has more free time and free money, or if they're working full time supporting multiple children, or if they're a youth on summer break who, doesn't have any classes or homework to be doing. But if it's starting to take more time or money than what would be appropriate for a hobby or an entertainment, then it's starting to veer out of that hobby or entertainment lane that it really needs to stay in. Just kind of orange flags. So let's close with what if someone is, seeing some of these red flags or has some concerns, whether it's theirs, family members, child, adult, loved one, where can they find some more information or help services? What would be your favorite go-to resources? Dr. Washington-Harvey, let's start with you, because we're in Washington, where we're airing this out of.
Well, the Evergreen. Of course. They have wonderful array of services, lots of information on their websites. They have list of providers on their on the website. There's lots of things there that you could take advantage of. Another thing to consider is talk to your doctor about it. Tell them what's happening, and if there's resources that they are aware of that you can participate in. Most insurance companies now are paying for gambling treatment as part of a therapeutic intervention.
Yeah.
I've treated gambling for a number of years as part of my practice, not the entire part. So you can get those resources from your therapy. Also, organizations, Gamblers Anonymous.
Yes.
It's very good. You may have to search for a good group, because it's about fit.
Yeah.
Nothing else. And family members have support groups. Gamanon, that's for family problem gamblers. So I think those are excellent. Sometimes churches offer groups around just issues. Issues, and gambling may come up as part of that. And for one last thing for me, I know I haven't covered everything, is the crisis hotline. The crisis hotline is excellent. They provide excellent support and resources that are current within your communities. no matter where you live. And
Yeah.
they're staffed by mostly volunteers, and they are very compassionate
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
individuals, and will get you to the proper resource if you want.
Yeah. So the national number, there is a national number. It's not necessarily the number in every jurisdiction, but if it isn't, call 1-800-GAMBLER. That's a number, that's a call for help that Dr. Washington-Harvey is talking about. And it's open 24/7, 365 days out of the year, and they will get you linked to whatever the help resource is in the state or community that you're living in. Because I'm in Maryland, for example. So, if a person is watching this and wherever you are, the number is different, say, in the state of Massachusetts. But if you Google crisis helpline and add the state, you'll be able to find it. Or if you call the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline, they'll do their best to get you linked to help in your community.
Excellent, thank you. And in Washington, that's 1-800-GAMBLER, as she said, is kind of the national helpline. And if you're in Washington State, you can call that one. And there is the Washington State Problem Gambling Helpline, 1-800-547-6133. And both of these, as well as calling, if calling isn't your thing, have text and chat as
Yes.
well. And they're available 24/7, which is a great resource. There's also, we have a podcast, there's a recovery podcast,
Yeah.
there's apps to help with like monitoring or tracking or letting you know how much money you're saving when you're gambling free. There's all kinds of creative resources out there that people can choose from based on their needs and what kind of fits for them. But ultimately, as they're saying, reach out to something. This is not something people are meant to carry by themselves, and we don't heal alone. So reach out to someone that can help walk you through what you want to do as your next step, or to find those help resources. As Dr. Washington-Harvey says, find that fit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to close the live stream, and it's available to view on demand. Thank you for joining us for Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and we hope that you will promote awareness for this cause. And don't forget, Tuesday is Gambling Disorder Screening Day.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.